I'd like to welcome Liam to the show.
Yay,
Thank you.
Liam.
How are you doing, aside from being quarantined like everybody else?
It's good. I mean, it's fine here. Like, I'm in Burbank, California, so I left Brooklyn December 23rd and went to Boston for a couple weeks, and then we moved here right at the New Year. So, like, we were kind of getting into the swing of things, and then everything shut down. So that's a little weird, but, like, we have a backyard. We have a car. California's way more spread out, so, like, I imagine I imagine the feeling here is very different than it is in Brooklyn and where I would have been. But we're fine. It's all good. It's just a really weird time to be alive, but we're getting through it. I gave myself a haircut today, so that happened. I wanted to look good for you guys.
There we go. Looks good. Looks good.
So
But
you gave yourself that haircut? Because that looks, yeah. For me, I imagine home haircuts is just like my wife did me yesterday, and it's all just buzzed off. You look like actually you got some styling done. So well done.
I did the sides, and then my wife did the back. And then, I mean, in full disclosure, I'm not going to turn around because we have a little more work to do on the back. It's getting there. It's getting there. Yeah, we sort of went for it. I hadn't had my hair cut in 2 months, and I grow hair at an alarming rate. So, but yeah. But I'm excited to talk with you guys.
The hair looks good enough for the Slowdown.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Nice. Very good.
Yeah,
very
you
good.
escaped Brooklyn right on time.
Yeah, it seems like it. It really seems.
Well, and Sujewa, you've been hard at work. I mean, it's been a little while since we talked. I mean, we talk once a month, but this is this is later in the month than we usually talk. So
True.
In that time, you've launched a podcast portion of your blog. You've got at least one film under your belt that you're going to be debuting on the blog, and possibly 2 or 3. So what have you been up to, and how are you making movies out and about in New York in the midst of, like, the end of the world?
Well, this is the benefit of being starting too many projects and not finishing them for years. When you have some downtime, you can get caught up on them. The short Brooklyn Fantastic I shot in 2009, starring Amir Madla and Susan Weiss.
Right.
And I'm just editing it now, like 10 years later. And 2018 I shot Agnes the Alien with Aaliyah from Werewolf movie. So I'm editing that now. So I'm just getting caught up on everything I haven't done in a while. So we have a bunch of shows coming up. We got a show with you, interview with Amir, interview with Art, and the 2 short films. That's what's coming up at the blog in May.
Awesome.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, so you're able to. I mean, you're just editing and doing posts and stuff, and you can just do all that in your apartment on your computer. You've got everything that you need.
Yeah, pretty much. And trying to get work done. Clients, a lot of the projects were on hold, slowly trying to get that stuff going. So my productivity has been cut down by like half when it comes to regular work, half or more. Many days, watching TV, watching movies, sleeping a lot.
That sounds amazing. Oh my God, that sounds amazing. That's all I want.
It's like an unasked for vacation. I mean,
yeah.
When you think about the upcoming bills in the next couple of months, it's not
scary. Yeah.
It's not comforting, but it is nice to have some time off.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, yeah, and that's where escapism comes in handy. I don't think anybody expected it would become this important on such a global scale and this quickly. But yeah, so Liam, what? I mean, not to get too much into it, because I know this is the first time we're actually talking to one another.
Yeah, I've never talked to Liam before.
Right. So, but you're out in California. How are you affected by this whole thing? Are you working or?
Well, we moved out here because my wife got a job at a studio, and I in Brooklyn was running. I was working at a place called Brick, which is like a nonprofit art space, and I ran their filmmaking programs and their podcasting programs. So I left that job to come here. And, as is very typical, I was in conversation for a job. I was about to, it was sort of like things were starting to happen, and then they froze hiring. So but on the flip side, like I said before, we have a 2-year-old. So I'm in a position where I'm just being a dad during the day. So my wife will work at our dining room table and we'll play in the other room. And then we'll go for walks, and then she goes down for a nap, and I will either work on my podcast projects or apply for jobs, or sometimes just like stare off into space vacantly, thinking about or go grocery shopping and feel existential terror.
Yeah, it's like Mad Max.
Yeah, it's just a little better here, but at the beginning, oof. But yeah, so I'm sort of, sort of to Sujewa's point, like, I did not expect to have this kind of downtime, so I'm able to work a lot more on personal projects, because job hunting there's jobs that I can apply for, but it's not like everyone is doing a ton of hiring right now. So trying to find that balance between like personal projects, making money, and all that stuff right now. We're all in a position none of us expected to be in.
Yeah.
So it's just like trying to stay sane with all that.
And that's I guess that's the one silver lining, because everyone's being affected by this. So it's not like, 10,000 people are out of a job. It's, 22 million plus. So
it's a lot.
We've got an entire community, even if we don't all know each other yet, of people who are going to have to rely on each other to figure out how to live.
Yeah, it's going to be a totally different. I feel like it's like a weird seismic shift culture. It's good. Some kind of seismic shift culturally is going to have to happen.
Yeah, massively. I don't think Hollywood has ever stopped making movies, even during World War II.
Yeah, it's
the
really
first time.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, like, just the stuff that like tangentially I hear or whatever's going. It's just a crazy time, and I think that figuring out what to do is a real challenge.
The Larry David show is good. I watched season 10 while I was staying at home. Check it out.
Is that the new Curb season?
Yeah, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Larry David show.
Check that out. He's great. We've been watching Schitt's Creek on Netflix. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. I haven't seen
it. And then, Friday night, I managed to do Anatolia in basically one sitting, which is astonishing, because I start watching movies now, and 15 minutes in, I'm like, and I've been watching a lot of other movies and stuff like that. So,
but Anatolia, go ahead. Anatolia, you've seen before, right?
I saw Anatolia at the New York Film Festival premiere.
2011, 2012?
2011, and then I went, and actually it's a funny story, I missed the first scene because I was at the talk with Ceylan, and I ran over and I got the last ticket, and I sat down, and it was, the credits were playing, like the opening credit, and so I didn't know about the first scene of the movie until February of 2012, or January, when it played at Film Forum, and I saw it there for the second time. And then I've probably watched it. This is probably my 5th time.
Wow.
Since it came out, maybe. But like, you know how it is with a movie of that length. You probably watch part of it, and then it's like, ooh, I'm glad to have seen it in the theater twice, because I feel like I've actually seen the movie.
Yeah, you can't shut it down in the theater.
You can't, and it's testament to the movie that I actually was able to really engage. Like, we don't have a TV yet. So I was watching it on my, it's embarrassing to watch a movie like this, but I was watching it on my 10-inch Amazon tablet, because we're still waiting on our TV.
Yeah. Ceylan will not be happy to hear that.
I know. I don't want, well, I mean, I did see the goddamn thing twice in theaters.
Right.
So
you're set.
he can, I basically paid for that movie back. But yeah, I'd seen it. That kind of started a chain. That movie started a chain reaction for me with him. Like, that I went back and watched Distant, Three Monkeys, Climates, and then I saw Winter Sleep. I haven't seen the new one yet, The Wild Pear Tree, but it's really hard to see. I had New York Film Festival tickets and I had to miss it. So, but yeah, it's I was glad to revisit it. It's probably been 5-6 years.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of his other movies, but this one I really liked. Ian, you saw it for the first time. What are your thoughts?
I finished it about an hour ago.
Whoa.
And I detoxed by watching a partial rerun of the show Love Island with my wife.
Nice.
Yeah. I had to run to the entire polar opposite of that spectrum.
Sure.
Yeah. I was texting with Sujewa because we were getting ready to get ready for the show, and I said I just finished it. And he said, "What'd you think?" And I said I liked it, but it lost me in the last 40 minutes, which is a really weird thing to say about a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes. Like, I was really waiting for the first 2 hours and the last 40 minutes. And this is something I really want to talk to you guys about because I don't know how familiar you are with the series we've been doing, Liam, called The Slowdown. Last summer when Sujewa and I met, I was covering his film Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, as you can see the poster in the background there.
Right.
And it was my introduction to slow cinema. And so we've been doing this series where every month we talk about a slow cinema film. And this one came up, and now you're here joining us. So I've been really on board with a lot of the movies that we've covered for this show. And I really do like Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, and I feel like I need to watch it again when I have not been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, because part of it is, and we're going to jump around a bit here because I feel like for the YouTube/podcast community who don't maybe have any idea what this movie is about,
right,
what I'm about to say isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, but there's a tremendous amount, even for a slow cinema film, of forward momentum and mystery in this squad of people, couple of murder suspects, cops, military, out on this winding country road all night looking for a body. You're like, what's going on here? Spoiler alert, they find it, and then that last 40 minutes is the next day. As soon as the sun comes up, that forward momentum seems to just devolve into a lot of what I'll call paperwork conversations and walking down halls. And I feel like the meaning just wasn't there. And some of the meaning that was there, I don't know what it meant, or at least I don't know exactly why it was included. I feel like there's an entire second movie that was going to start after the end credits, and I really wanted to be able to see that. Instead, I'm just left with the information I was given.
Yeah, it's almost like two different movies. I like the driving around part. If I had to cut the movie, I would just end it at the end of the night. I wouldn't even go into the rest of the stuff.
It's really, because rewatching it, so seeing it in the theater, when it played, and part of it could have been it was the film festival, and I got to hear Ceylan speak, and he's a really interesting guy, and he speaks like his films. So he's very slow. It's very deliberate. Part of it is probably that he's speaking Turkish, English in these things, and it's not his native language. But he is very deliberate and paced, and the movie plays on a big screen like gangbusters.
No doubt.
I'll say this: it's a harder sell on a small screen, especially I think in those final 40 minutes. I remember seeing it and thinking this movie feels like a night of drinking followed by the hangover of the next day a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're very part of the reason I like slow cinema, but what I like more than anything else is mysteries that turn into something else, mysteries that become existentialist dramas. I think are really interesting, and I think this movie's interesting because of it, that element of it. And the sort of there's it's very clearly influenced by Anton Chekhov's plays, which is interesting, and it almost could be a play in certain ways. It has a play-like element. But all that to say, I did find myself watching it 2 nights ago a little more mystified than I had been when I saw it originally. When I saw it originally, I was like, this thing is a fucking masterpiece. Pardon my language.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Watching it now, I was a little more like, huh. Like it didn't quite, and I think it was the same thing. I think that second half, it works for me, but it definitely doesn't have like the juice of the first half. And I wonder if if it's intentional. I mean, not that you're not gripped by it, but the shift of the storytelling towards the doctor is a very, very interesting and deliberate choice, because he kind of sneaks into the movie as the main character.
Yeah, and the focus does shift throughout. I mean, for most of the movie, I think it's fair to say that we're focused on was it Nachi, who's the police sergeant, or the head of the head of the cops, not the head of the investigation, because that's sort of the prosecutor character, but he's having to escort this that there's not even a matter of him being a suspect, really. They call him the suspect Keenan, but everyone just pretty much knows. I don't know if I guess he confessed, or they beat it out of him or something, that he killed this person, and he and his brother buried the body out in this field. And because the landscape is just so similar and it's at night, they can't find it. So that's why they're driving around for 8 hours or whatever it is. And it's a great series of these little misadventures, is sort of the wrong word, because it implies a wackiness, but it's just sort of this sadness and futility and frustration that's mounting throughout the night, and tempers flare and all that good stuff. But I feel like we're focusing on this cop character and his issues, and his kind of the glimpses we get into his family life, and his own personal sense of justice, that he just wants to beat the crap out of this guy. And especially when they find the body and the condition that it's in, he's got this real spirit of, justice to him, because the corpse has been hogtied, and he just feels like it's such an inhuman thing. Of course, we find out very quickly that there's a reason for it. I thought that was a bit of clever kind of dark humor.
Right.
A lot of comedy in the movie.
There is, but it's really, it goes beyond, I think, black comedy. It's more like sad comedy.
Yeah, it's bleak.
Yeah, but going from that character to the sudden focus on the doctor, because we do get a bit of the doctor and the prosecutor having this really weird conversation. And I loved not only the faces that Ceylan chose to showcase in this movie, because this is one of those great face movies where all of the actors, I don't know them like other work that they've done. This is the first time for me, but I feel like I could watch movies with them just going forward, because they're all wonderful. They're great performances. They're great to look at. In the scene where the prosecutor and the doctor are having their sort of heart-to-heart, where the prosecutor talks about this mysterious case of a woman who predicted her own death.
Right.
The framing of that was fascinating, because it's mostly shot in, two singles that are sort of cut together. The doctor is framed. He's got a couple of vertical posts behind him, but it's still a very open scene. The prosecutor is shot sort of, but framed by these twisted branches and close up, with a fire burning off to the right-hand side of the frame. So it's this very hellish, almost sinister, like he's confessing something about his own personal hell, which may in fact be the case. But that conversation gets brought up and up and up throughout the movie, particularly in that last 40 minutes. It becomes so important, but it ultimately dead ends. I went to Wikipedia. I confess, after this movie, I went to Wikipedia to see if I'd missed something, because again, I was very tired. And it turns out
it's a tough movie to watch when you're tired.
It's a good idea to see check out Wikipedia for a movie like this. I thought it was like 3 stories tied together. One is the search in the night. 2 is the prosecutor and his wife. I think that was his personal story. His wife killed himself.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That was that, and the 3rd story is the family of the killer. There's no plot points to hide at this point. It's been 8 years since the movie came out. So, the killer is the father of the child, and the man who he killed was the actual husband of the woman, and the illegitimate child. So
But he
third,
didn't kill him, is the also implied in the film as well. That the other brother is the actual murderer.
right. But he got mad when he realized that, this guy cheated on his family, blah blah blah. So tying that up is the third, the third story. So like if Jarmusch were to do the story, it would have been like, title story 1, title story 2, title story 3. I think that would have been a more smoother, transition. Since it's all meshed in one, and the 3 stories have different speeds and different focuses, it feels a little weird, all smushed in together. But go ahead.
I think the fourth story here, and this is maybe where it gets a bit muddy, is the fourth story involves that doctor. Because as much as he's tied into the prosecutor's story, he's the kind of guy who listens to his pseudo confession that he goes right up to the precipice of saying, yeah, this is actually about me. But then there is such a shift to the doctor, and we never really get a handle on what his deal is. We see him in his apartment. He's looking at all these old, like, sepia photographs of someone who may have been his wife or his lover or sister, who knows. Scenes of a kid, but they're old photographs, so maybe it's from his own childhood. There's something going on there. And then there's that detail during the autopsy. They discover that the victim may have been buried alive, but the doctor deliberately chooses to omit that information from the autopsy recording. He tells the technician not to record it and just to go on. We don't really know why. And that's when I say that I felt like there was another movie starting after the end credits rolled, that's what I'm referring to. I'm like, well, what was that all about? Like, what is his connection to this? It felt like he was trying to protect someone or cover up for someone or what. I don't know. It's very confusing.
I think he's trying to protect the Keenan, because he knows. I think they develop a bond over the course of the film, and I think he knows that the situation is a little messier than
straightforward killing.
And I think that, one thing that there's the stories, and then I think that there's what the themes of the movie are, and this one of the like sort of prominent themes, especially this time for me, is the sort of like difference between country and city. And it's very clear that the doctor is a city guy, and then you have the prosecutor who sort of has like kind of a more cosmopolitan existence. He talks about how he has to be in Ankara later in the day, which is the major city in Turkey, versus the kind of like you have the prosecutor who's the doctor the police chief whose son goes to the doctor. Like, if there's a certain sense that like there are people there that are of the community that are rural, and then you have the sort of like people that come in. And I think that the comedy in the movie comes from that, but also the kind of like country manners. Like, there's a little bit of that humor to it, and part of me thinks that a little bit of it is about that kind of like unknowability of people who are from somewhere else coming into a place where
the thing about the doctor, that story, I kind of remember it now. Maybe he has something to do. Maybe his own life mirrors in some way the situation that these other characters are going through. The kid without the father, the actual father who is now in jail because he killed the man that the mother is married to. So I think that's what all that flashback stuff was referring to. So the third story is as much the story of the doctor, why he does what he does, as the story of the family.
Right. And, but that's something where I really have to step out of the movie, walk around the block a couple of times to get my head around it, and still come back to, well, maybe that's what they were getting at.
Yeah.
I just personally, I'm not a fan of that degree of ambiguity. I watched a Netflix movie starring Chris Hemsworth the other day. It's very good, and it's got like 4 different layers of father-son dynamic themes that I think are, much richer than you'd expect from a movie that's pretty much about like blowing people up.
I saw the trailer and I was like, no thanks.
No, it's it's very good. I mean, it's a world away from what we're talking about here, but it's the kind of thing that I have with certain, I'll call them art house movies, that get so wrapped up in the idea of wanting to present something that's lofty and head scratching that it kind of forgets that you need to have some kind of connective tissue in there to drive your point home. Otherwise, it's the ambiguity that I personally hate, which is like, well, what do you think it means? Which can get you up to a certain point, but I have to have an idea that the author of the piece has an idea that they're just like not letting me in on, instead of perhaps painting themselves into a creative corner and then leaving it up to me to figure out to finish the painting.
No, I think the philosophical stance of the movie is truth is difficult to know, and truth is difficult to express, and it's difficult to practice, because you see that throughout the conversations that they have in the night. The guy keeps forgetting where he buried the body. That's kind of a super significant thing, where you killed a man and buried the person, but you can't find the body. So and then the story of the prosecutor telling the story. Obviously, he has some guilt about possibly causing the death of his own wife through suicide. So by the time it got to the other stuff in the city, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That there's a lot of slipperiness. That then all the stories are kind of like that. Guy can't find the body. The prosecutor, unsure about causing a death, and the doctor is trying to patch things up the best way he can, knowing how murky things are.
Well, but I think the first two of those three scenarios, the inability to find the body and the prosecutor, those themes, those ideas are not completely spelled out for us. There is a little bit of legwork we have to do to meet the filmmaker halfway, but there's enough supporting evidence in the narrative to help us get there. With the doctor, it's like we see some photographs and he makes a decision about this, the autopsy. He does, I guess, develop a bond with Keenan insofar as he offered him a cigarette and he, thanked him for it or something. I mean, he's not as hard on him as the police chief, but still, you could look at the evidence we're given as far as the doctor's motivations and apply that to literally any scenario. He could be walking into that room and seeing the photographs, the sepia tone photographs, and be like, yeah, I really, back when I wanted to be a model, instead of going to med school, these were some pictures that I really admired. It could be that, or it could be, daddy issues or ex-wife issues. It's so left field and so late in the proceedings, and it goes nowhere, that I thought it was a wasted opportunity.
No, I thought it made sense. Did the doctor grow up as an only child without a father?
I don't know. I mean, they don't.
I got that vibe.
But again, it's a vibe. It could be completely. There's no indication, and also there's no indication that that's even important to whatever is happening in this story. Like,
well, the doctor is the only one who knows that the killer is the father of the child, right? And
no, because the cops find out first. The chief and the prosecutor, they go into that. The chief or the prosecutor, I think the chief pulls the prosecutor into that house when they're going to visit the village where the mayor is, and he's like, that's where we learn that revelation. I think the doctor is told later. So, and to something you had said earlier, Liam, about covering up the suffocation to protect Keenan in some way, possibly. Not suffocation, but the fact that he was possibly buried alive.
He's protecting him.
Right, but I don't know it from what, because I mean, it's already been established that he and his brother killed this guy. So what does it matter if they buried him alive? It's like, are they going to give him an extra death penalty? I mean, right?
It could be. I mean, that's a good question. It could be that it's a more severe punishment. I don't know. That was sort of my impression of it. I mean, I think for me, the thing that I walk away, and I totally hear a lot of what you're saying, Ian. I think, in addition to the question of like what is truth or whatever, I think like a more concrete thing to think about this movie is that one of the things that you could say that it's about is just people are fucking daunting, right? Like that's just like such a takeaway from it. Like no one understands each other. No one can really communicate with one another. The prosecutor, who's supposed to be sort of like a a guy who's concerned with justice and making sure that things play clearly is like so obfuscating an experience that he's had that he can't talk about it directly. And I feel like it falls in that tradition of like 60s European cinema, Antonioni, these kind of like far-reaching existentialist movies that like don't spell a lot of things out, but ultimately seem to be about the fact that people will never really understand one another. Like that was my takeaway from watching it this time, is that like, and I mean, that might kind of just be, I feel like that's accumulated information, that's accumulated data from watching the movie and letting it unfold in front of you and kind of experiencing it that way. But yeah, for me, this time it was about time, like literally the passage of time, like the fact that they're wandering around these Anatolian ruins and like you feel the history of the steppes in the film, and that like there's also that feeling. There's that conversation he has with the bald guy whose name I forget, but just the idea that like this is all going to last longer than we are. So there's something about it being about the unknowability, but also like whether the events that we're seeing have any significance in a larger sense, which admittedly is kind of a frustrating thing for a movie to be about. Like, does any of this matter? But I think to me, it works because it's so deliberately done and deliberately paced that I sort of get caught up in the imagery and I sort of make connections on my own. But like, again, I don't think the movie plays as well as it could on a small screen versus how it plays in a big movie theater. It really like, but it didn't work for me as well at home.
Well, go ahead. One thing about the movie, I saw a submarine war movie, Hunter Killer. You know, it was clearly spelled out.
Was that Gerard Butler?
Yeah. A couple nights ago. Clearly spelled out.
And you won't watch Extraction?
No,
Sorry.
listen. Let me finish. So it was clearly spelled out, and a lot of exciting things going on. It was incredibly boring, right?
Yeah.
I knew, the second in command who's questioning the sub commander, the Russian defectors, incredibly boring. I had to shut it down. I finished it like after 2 or 3 times. So that movie is following a genre, right? So it helps to look at Anatolia as a genre of its own, right? It's from Turkey. It's a different culture, different storytelling standards, and maybe different commercial expectations. So if you don't compare it to a clear-cut American movie and let it stand as its own, foreign cultural story, it works because there are a lot of mysteries, and maybe towards the end, it's not, like you say, it's not clearly settled exactly what's going on with the doctor, and maybe it is. But I think if you accept it from the wandering around and people trying to figure out what's going on, and the second story, it kind of feels like another version of those two stories.
Well, I mean, I feel like I understand what you're saying, but I feel like by applying that standard to films of other cultures, you're kind of letting them off the hook and not necessarily drawing a line between what is good art and what is bad art. I'm not saying this is a clear. I don't think it's a clear example, because you can say, well, different cultures have different standards and ambiguity is okay, and that makes everything open to interpretation, which I don't agree with. I will say
different filmmakers tell stories differently.
Well, I understand that, but it is possible for a filmmaker who's really talented to make a misstep, and a misstep
I'm
that
not
can't.
Sure.
Well, no filmmaker is perfect.
No. I mean, you're starting with the position that there's a form that the film has to hit, right?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it is possible for a movie to work on several different levels, but to, and some people will watch it and say, this is a great, perfect film, and I can excuse a lot of missteps, but there are other people who might watch it and say, well, this doesn't really work. But for you to say, well, it might not work because you're not interpreting it through the proper lens, I can just say, well, it's also just bad storytelling in this one particular, venue.
Right. Well, that kind of statement starts with the position there is a type of storytelling. There's one type or 10 types, right? my position is, however the storyteller wants to tell the story, that's where we start. So
sure, but that also implies that if the storyteller wants to tell a story,
yeah,
and they want to tell it the way that they want to tell it, then what if they tell it badly? If your position is, well, that's the way I want to tell it, then you can't just step in and say, well, you might want to fix it. No, that's the way I want to tell it. It's perfect. It's fine. Just leave me alone.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with like I said, if I had cut this movie, I would have just done the, if he said, here's the footage, you finish it, I would just do the car part at night only, and I would end it when that stuff is over. I don't even need the daytime stuff. But
right, so,
this
but
is
that's
the story he tells. And
right,
I'm fine with the way it is.
But this is what I'm saying, is you are then acknowledging that the way that he tells the story from beginning to end, you're saying that you would cut out a third of his movie, which implies that on a certain level, a third of his movie doesn't work. And you're acknowledging that.
No. If I told the story, like if he says, here's my story, you tell your version, I would take out the end and I would try to finish it up by the end of the night, from the middle of the night till the end of the night. So I'm saying there's no one standard to tell a story, and that being the case, I'm fine with how he told the story. I don't think I can say, well, just because it's not clear in the end that I personally think it would have been better if the last story made more sense. But maybe it does. Maybe I have to see it a few more times.
I feel like there's a contradiction there. You're saying that the way he told the story is fine, but you're not fine with the way that he told the story according to the way you would have done it.
No, the way that it's out now is fine. I'm just saying if I, a different storyteller, were to tell the story, I would do it differently. But both versions are fine.
And that's kind of what I'm that's kind of what I'm saying. That's the nature of film criticism in a way, is looking at a film and interpreting it, and to a certain extent, because nothing exists in a vacuum. We're talking about a genre of slow cinema. We're also talking about the context of the movies that we've seen. And I'm saying that I've seen versions of this type of story, at least in terms of the ambiguity and the resolution, told better than the way that it is here. I mean, I think that you could have stuck with the daytime stuff if they had followed the conventions that they set up with the nighttime portion. For me, it's much more dramatically compelling, that whole, I'll call it a Z plot line, where the police chief is on the phone with his wife. Their kid sounds like he's on the autism spectrum or something, and he's got this medication that he needs to take, and he keeps forgetting to get the prescription filled. So he's like, doctor, don't let me forget to get this prescription, else my wife's going to kill me if I don't come home with it. They keep coming back to that, and that is more filled with tension. It's a different kind of tension than dealing with a murder, but it's a very real problem this guy has to deal with. And I'll take that over this weird left field. I'm not going to reveal the fact that this guy was buried alive for reasons that the audience is going to have to run circles around their own heads to figure out if it actually means anything.
I thought that was pretty clear. I thought that would have made the crime much more.
Well, the other thing to think
much
about,
more worse.
Right, but here's the thing. Why does the doctor care if Keenan actually committed a worse crime? Because
for the child, to get the people reunited later. Because
get what people reunited? I mean, the
killer may be executed if the crime was brutal enough.
But here's a question. Why would a doctor in good conscience want to reunite a young child with a person who had just murdered someone, possibly horrifically?
Yeah, but that's his father. So
there are kids who are separated from murderous parents all the time, and we don't say, that family unit has to stay together even though the dad's a killer, right?
Right. But I think in that last story, a point was made that the doctor, or even the storyteller, the director, feels that growing up without a father is a difficult thing.
Well, that's undoubtedly, but there's a difference between growing up without a dad and then growing up without a dad who's, Ted Bundy. I mean,
well, it's not a mass murder situation.
Well, we don't know that. I mean, we don't know anything about Keenan aside from what we're given in this movie.
Well, didn't we learn that Liam, you can clarify. Didn't we learn that the guy who died, he got angry, learning about the infidelity, and then a fight broke out?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, watching it, at least for me, and I think that there is a lot of ambiguity in the movie. I think it's intentionally ambiguous, but I do, from the way that I've read it, is that the murder is accidental, or is
that's
not
what
accidental,
I thought.
or it's like unplanned, like maybe they kill him by accident. There is the question of why he's been murdered. There's clearly some kind of love triangle going on. I don't think I noticed. I've seen this movie a couple times. I don't think I actually ever really noticed, Ian, that he kind of brushes that detail aside. I think because honestly, at the end, because you're 2 hours and 35 minutes into the movie at that point, and like for me, every time I've watched it, I've been very wrapped up in the doctor at the end of the movie, just like his experience, and I think that it's worth noting that in that moment he's observed Keenan get the rock thrown by the child and it hits him in the face, and I think that scene has some of the least effective filmmaking in the movie for a variety. I mean, mostly because it's stylistically different, but it doesn't play as well as it could. But I partially wonder if maybe the reason he omits this detail is he doesn't want to. Murdering someone is. We're not sitting here going like, well, it's way worse to do X, but like the fact that he's buried alive feels so much more extreme to me. So maybe he's trying to protect the guy, but he's also trying to protect the family from knowing this stuff. Like, to me, the reason he chooses to omit that detail is because he has somewhat invested in this guy or cares about this guy and doesn't think he's as bad as he's been made out to be, which is, I think, a conclusion that the police chief has also come to. Like, he's really aggressive with the guy, but then when they go into the barn and have the conversation, that's clearly shifted, because I think ultimately it's not as clear cut. And I think that that's a little bit what the movie's about too, is like this situation is not as clear cut as we would like it to be.
And that's, I understand where you're coming from, both of you. I guess I'm trying to consider these people as not just characters in a specific plot, but as real people, because I feel like that's what Ceylan is trying to give us, is something that is a very realistic portrayal of a series of events, given that this is a 2.5-hour movie that, it condenses the time. It's not 8 hours or whatever time they're driving around at night, but it is trying to give us that feel of the passage of time and people kind of getting to know each other. I just wonder, is this the first time that this doctor has ever come across a morally ambiguous situation with someone he has, worked with? Does he have a soft spot for people from broken families? Because if that's the case, I assume he's dealt with a lot of that during his life, because he's an older guy. I mean, it's not like he's just out of medical school and he's 22 and he's like, oh my God, I got to protect this family. I feel like it's an odd choice, and I need more information from the movie in order to just be okay with drawing these conclusions that we're talking about.
How about just leaving it alone? How about saying we just won't know? Because the submarine war movie, it followed the template, it followed the formulas, and by doing so, it became really boring and tedious.
No, I'm not. No, but you're saying that there's only two extremes. I'm saying that there is a way to do nuance and perhaps tell the story in a different way, even if even if he had not ordered the detail about the dirt in the lungs to be stricken from the record and just let that stand, and maybe let us consider, does this say something about Keenan that, perhaps it was manslaughter, it was an accidental killing, like they didn't mean to bury him alive, they thought he was dead? Or does it say that Keenan and his brother buried a guy alive, so maybe he's worse than they thought?
I think that's possible too. Yeah, I think
right. But if they had let that stand and not had that detail about you need to scrub that, that would have been a point of ambiguity. I think would have been more satisfying and more, because it opens up more questions about this character than that needs to be started. Like, that engine needs to start towards the beginning or the middle of the movie, not right at the end. Right? Because if you had chopped off that last 40 minutes, you would have had a really beautiful little movie. But in that 40 minutes, you're like, we're going to focus on the doctor, but we're not really going to focus on him. We're just going to show him more. We're going to show him filling out paperwork and looking at photographs. And then he makes this really weird decision at the end that we're just going to leave you with, and you got to figure it out. And I'm like, I'm just not a fan of that, because I don't think the rest of the movie supports what that last 40 minutes tries to dredge up.
Sounds good. Another difference is the truth during the night and the truth during the day. The nighttime stuff is more like a fantastic dream story. Especially remember that the scene with the mayor's daughter.
Yes.
Like all this death, talk of death, and frustration, and then she comes in like an angel. So it's almost like a dream. Then
right before that is when the dead Keenan sees the murder victim. Right. It was like right before the.
He has like a hallucination or something.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. One more thing. So the nighttime is like a dream, but it's simpler compared to what happens during the daytime. Daytime is much more complex.
It's more bureaucratic, and like I think the nighttime stuff is kind of like that experience that we've all had. When we've gone to find a body. No, like when we're in a car, when you're driving all night.
Oh, I saw a dead body this week, by the way. So.
Wait, let's rewind that tape. Hold on a second, Liam. When did you see a dead body, Sujewa?
I go to the Rite Aid once a day usually to get various supplies. The regular trip that I make every day with my girlfriend. 2 days ago, I posted up a photo on my Twitter. 2 days ago, I saw, right before going to the Rite Aid, National Guard team and the NYPD pull up in a van into a house. I recognize that kind of team from the news and that kind of rental van. That's what they use in New York to pick up dead bodies in the COVID-19 dead bodies in the city. So I saw them go in. When we came out of the Rite Aid, they brought the body out, put it in, closed up, and drove off. And that's like exactly a block away from where I live. So I can relate a little bit to that story.
But it's like even that story in a certain sense like brings you kind of closer to what this movie deals with, which is like that first night. That night is these guys kind of in this situation. You're dealing with sort of archetypal kind of characters, and there's a kind of like there's a mystery. There's like a kind of like a curiosity, and there's that my favorite scene in the whole movie, which is when they sit with the mayor and have this long conversation about the morgue and this is another thing where I feel like you get something about the movie, which is that like, oh, we need a morgue because all these young Turks that live in this town have moved to Germany or have moved somewhere else, and like they want to say goodbye to their parents who've died in this town. Like it's all very sort of like
it becomes petty, more and more. It becomes
more
and more
deep.
about politics.
Yeah, and just and life and the way that like life is shifting and changing, and when I think about the ending of the movie and I think about why he might choose to not reveal that there was dirt in the lungs, I think again about the scenes where he's looking at the pictures and he has a picture with his wife and he has a picture with his friends. I think he is for some reason estranged from a group of people, and I think that creates my reading is that he has sympathy for Keenan because he is an outsider. He's left somewhere and he's come somewhere new, and that's my reading of it. Is we don't know anything about his past, which I'm fine with, because one of the things that I think that this movie is gangbusters cinema. Like I think you can draw your own conclusions from a lot of what you see. I'm not saying you're wrong, Ian. I think that there's also
there's no wrong way.
But I think that there is a desire to feel some satisfaction from the storytelling that you might not be getting. But for me, at least this time, I felt like, actually weirdly, it was like, oh, he feels bad for this guy because there's something in his past, I don't know what it is, that has some kind of correlation or connection with what's happened to Keenan.
Yeah, I thought it was about a family staying together. I got that feeling when I first. By the way, this movie is best when you watch it the first time, because you don't know what's going on. You don't know, you have to slowly get used to this culture and these kind of people. These are not Americans. and
Well,
the way
yeah,
they
but
behave.
I don't think that has anything to do with it. I mean, I've seen a lot of
No,
movies, and I got to get immersed in this. I mean, I was on board, and I
no, no,
think
no. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's best the first time you watch it because it's more of an experience, a ride that you go through all the way to the end. Then the second and third times you can try to solve the mysteries. That's just my take on it.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I got what the movie was trying to say. I would go back and rewatch this from a purely cinematic experience because I would love to see this on a big screen. And if I had the opportunity, I'd really be wrestling with, do I just get up and leave at the 2 hour mark? Because I mean, it is gorgeous to look at from start to finish.
It's a
But
good
as far
hangout
as
movie too. Just
Yeah,
hanging
yeah.
out with these people,
and
which I
that's
like.
that's sort of the key frustration I have going back to when I was talking about the police chief and his kid's medicine, that whole extended sequence with the mayor and, like you were saying, the issue with the morgue and learning about the history of the town, that speaks more to, I think, the human condition and whatever Ceylan was trying to say with this movie than, I mean, this film, it skirts with having a plot, I think, and having these kinds of issues with characters trying to cover stuff up or not cover stuff up or because they feel a certain way about their past. If you take all of that stuff out and just have it be a hangout movie about this culture and this particular predicament and this is how they investigate crimes, I think it's a much stronger piece than trying to dabble in, oh, well, we have to insert something that is, to Sujewa's sort of point, more along a traditional line of we have to have a point A, a point B, a point C in terms of this resolution. It can't just be there's these people that committed a crime, they go find the body, and then they go home. Everybody has to have some kind of a connection or a philosophical point of view on the story. That whole thing about the prosecutor and his, is probably about his wife. Aside from that scene I described earlier with the beautiful framing and the idea that he's trying to cover something up, maybe it's superfluous. Like it
Right,
doesn't really belong in this movie.
but that's the kind of story it is. It's like saying Chinese food is not Italian food. It's a different kind of story. Look at the other movie. Look at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? How
Mm-hmm.
did they clarified almost everything by inserting flashbacks. That's something this Once Upon a Time in Anatolia doesn't do. Both movies are kind of hangout movies. They're with some characters for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where the story is going. We kind of know because of American history how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's going to end. But I kind of felt both movies are similar, except Tarantino clarifies everything, to a much greater degree, and that's his way of telling
I
the
don't know if
story.
I agree with that really. I think that
Yeah, that's fine.
there's well, I'm just saying like that there's questions in that film that are just different questions that are left open. I mean, I think that like they're both kind of similarly about big thematic ideas of I mean, one's kind of about culture and where things go, but I won't feel that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is explicitly spelled out.
Much more spelled out, much more like only there's like a couple of mysteries that are not shown. Like, did that Brad Pitt's character killing? I mean, I remember vaguely there was like only a couple of mysteries, whereas Anatolia is full of mysteries.
But you're it's almost like you're saying that it's a criticism to have a movie spell out everything for you.
No. I'm saying that's fine. I'm saying both are fine. It's just two different types of two different ways of telling stories.
Right,
and
but
go ahead.
I guess, and I think we're just gonna have to. I'm gonna use a phrase I hate to use: agree to disagree, because I feel like yes, everyone's free to tell their own stories in their own way, but I think if you're evaluating art and trying to draw comparisons and actually engage in criticism, you have to be able to say, yes, this person told a story the way that they wanted to tell it, but the way they wanted to tell it is ineffective in some way.
Yeah,
and that's perfectly fair.
You.
That's perfectly fair.
Yeah. For you as an audience member, but also Anatolia is a one-of-a-kind product. Just like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You don't really have something like that. Like, there's not like 10 other movies that are like that.
I think that they can be asked to stand up to criticism. I mean, I think that's part of the point, right? Like, everyone, because people are bored right now, there's all these conversations online about like five perfect movies, and like I can't think of anything more boring than the idea of it being perfect. I totally hear it. Like, and I love Anatolia. I mean, I don't think I love it the way that I used to, but again, I've seen it a few times now. But like, yeah, there's a little bit of Ian, I wonder if like maybe, and whether that this is like useful or not, like I wonder if like part of the deal is that you are supposed to be a little bit frustrated by it. Like, you're supposed to be really engaged in the experience of watching the movie, and it's beautiful and it's well acted, and like, I mean, it's stunning, and you're sort of involved a little bit with every little nuance and every little detail, and you're like leaning into the movie a little bit. And then at the end,
what about this? What if the filmmakers making a comment about the culture, just like Iranian filmmakers do, or maybe some American filmmakers do, saying this kind of nonsense that goes on in Turkey, maybe he's saying this is what happens, and he doesn't like it.
Yeah, I think it could be that. I mean, I think that maybe, I'm spitballing here, but I think that part of it, maybe dissatisfaction is part of the point. I don't know. I don't really know if that's the case, but yeah, I mean, there's something really a little bit frustrating about the end of the movie. I totally agree.
I think everyone gets that. Yeah, I got the same example. I'm like, what are we going into now? It's like it's like a day in the life of a Turkish doctor.
There's also something interesting about like the idea of like listening to the autopsy. Like, I think that's
it was a little too much. I thought it was a little too gore, and the first part was more like a dream story, even though the first part, the nighttime stuff, felt like a fairy tale, and that the daytime stuff seemed more like a regular drama about a real life crime.
But I think that you need both for the movie to really achieve its.
Well, that's the whole movie. That's the whole movie. Yeah,
I gotta say, both. Yeah, I gotta say, the one thing I will take away, and it'll probably haunt my dreams about that last segment, is the autopsy scene, because maybe the two of you, having seen a large number of films between yourselves, I can't think of another instance where there's an autopsy scene where it was gross without having seen anything. It was all achieved through sound, through the cracking of bone and the squishing around of guts. It was very unsettling, but it was also fascinating because I felt like I was privy to an actual autopsy.
Like we were there.
Yeah, it wasn't sensationalism, but it's kind of horrific, and I just wondered about that technician who's going. The doctor is standing there like, yeah, take the heart out, crack open the chest, and the guy's like, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, he's just seeing the body as meat at that point, which is something I've heard about people who perform autopsies. Is like once the body is no longer alive, it is just a thing to be disassembled and tagged. Mm-hmm. It's morbid, but also fascinating.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was like, do you think part of the thing with the movie is in that final 40 minutes is like, this doctor's been privy to all of this stuff, and he's seen all these things happen. Like, he's seen this, he's just had this crazy night, and then to be back in his regular life with like these two technicians who don't care. And meanwhile, like, he's watching this little boy leave with his mother. Like, there's this like two things going on where he's just lied. We understand, like, he's, he doesn't know what's going to happen to this prisoner. Like, to me, it's just what makes the movie really work well is the accumulation of information building to this point where you're just like, what the fuck is going to happen? Like, but in a really chill way, because it's not like a high stress movie. Like, mm-hmm. I guess the reason I like the movie is I'm very intrigued by the ambiguity of it, because I feel like there's so much specificity in the sounds of the bones being broken or whatever. Like, I feel very present in the moment, and I'm having like an actual experience where I don't feel like I need to necessarily know exactly. I felt very satisfied by the end of the movie because I don't feel like I need to know what's going on, but I'm very invested in what's happening.
I get that, but that goes back to what I was saying before, is you can take out all of that quote unquote plot element about the family and just have it be, he could just be doing this autopsy at the end of a crazy night. It's like one last thing he's got to do before he gets to go home and go to bed. And he sees the kid with his mom out the window, because that's a very nice shot. It's an impressive shot.
Yeah.
You know, the kids playing soccer, it looked like half a mile away, and the ball gets kicked right over to, I'm just as a piece of filmmaking, like being able to kick that ball up to, you know, exactly where it needed to be for the little kid actor to catch it and kick it back and then go back, running back to his mom. That's great stuff. And it has it does not have to have any connection to greater family drama or whatever that's going to happen after the credits roll, because they're not going to make, you know, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia 2.
You never know.
Well, one more time in Anatolia.
once again in Anatolia.
That's it. Once again, I like that.
But yeah, so I think I'm beaten up on the movie a bit, and I think it's just because it's kind of like an 8 out of 10 for me. And
8 out of 10 is pretty good.
And that, right, but it's those last two where I'm like, I'm so wrapped up in what he's doing as a filmmaker. I'm so like there. I'm like, oh my God, okay, so they've found the body and we're moving into Act 3. That's what's gonna happen. And I'm waiting around for a half hour, and wow. So that's my frustration. Yeah.
So maybe that's the difference between watching it as a film critic versus watching it as a audience member / filmmaker. I'm fine with whatever choices filmmakers make, unless they ask me to remake it, right? Then I would make my own version of it. But I see film like paintings or poems, however, there's no mistake. However they choose to finish it that's the thing. That's what you have to deal with.
Except you've never heard a bad poem, you've never seen a bad painting, you've never watched a bad movie.
No, bad something. There's a lot of things that I don't like. You know, paintings that I don't like, movies that I don't like because of whatever reasons. But overall, the starting point is the work is done. That's the artwork. How we react to it is up to us. And so
you're saying Transformers: The Last Night can in some way stand on the same pedestal as Once Upon a Time in Anatolia?
Sure.
Because they are
they're finished works. I don't like Transformers: The Last Night, but that's what it is. That's the finished thing. You can't really, you can second guess and say I would do it differently, but at one point you have to take the finished thing and accept it completely and then think about it.
Sure.
Which is what we're
thinking
doing.
About it part where I think.
But I feel like criticism is so essential because, like, how else do we understand and interpret these things? Like, especially in the longer term, like, I feel like it's really important to be able to be like, okay, well, Transformers: The Last Night is, I haven't seen it, but I can't imagine it's my jam. But like,
that's a secondary thing. That's like food criticism versus eating, right?
Because
food and movies are different things.
Of course, they're different things. But once you receive a meal, you eat it, and then you can go into the criticism, right?
But that's what we're doing when you watch it.
Right. I agree. I'm saying criticism is fine, but for me, a film not being perfect is not a problem. However, the filmmaker finished it, I'm cool with it.
Okay.
It's not a problem to me as much as it is for Ian. My point being, you being a film critic, you're approaching it in a different way.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true because I was a film, an art admirer, and I'm also an artist, and I have, forever ago, I used to make films. Mm-hmm. So I'm approaching it from the perspective of an artist. The criticism sort of came in when I put form to what was naturally going on in my brain and my soul, and as accumulating these experiences of art. Yeah. So criticism is not some lofty pedestal that you have to retrain your art appreciation brain in order to indulge and make into a craft. It's just something we all do. Same with food criticism. Yeah. It starts when you put it in your mouth. How you experience it. This tastes bad. That is a criticism, and it's not like, well, I made it and, I completed it. That makes it inherently valuable. No, it doesn't, because you can feed someone.
You could argue that there's inherent value.
Poison, and it's like, well, this was this Big Mac poisoned you half to death, but it was still good because I finished it. That doesn't.
You're missing the point. So Anatolia is a unique work of art, right? There isn't, like, to go back to that submarine war movie. There's like 10 submarine war movies.
But there was, only, what was it, Missile Command or what? But that movie was the product of a very specific team of, artisans, directors, screenwriters. You lumping it in with 10 other things, I mean, that's a judgment on your half.
No, you're rushing to judgment. You're not listening. That submarine war movie, from the beginning, from the first 10 minutes, because I've seen the other submarine war movies, it was mirroring a formula. Whereas, and that's the thing it wanted to make. It wanted to make an exciting submarine war movie similar to the other submarine war movies. And I watched it. It didn't do a great job doing a slightly different version of the previous submarine war movies. That was the thing it was going for. Whereas Anatolia, I haven't seen any other movie that's like that. That there's nothing that I could say. I mean, even Jim Jarmusch movies, I can compare them to other Jarmusch movies and go, oh, he kind of did something bizarre here. Fine, I'm not into it, but it's bizarre. Anatolia seems like a completely unique kind of story and storytelling. I haven't seen any other movie like it. So I think, for me, I'm fine with leaving it as it is. That's the kind of story it is.
Let's ask the Ceylan expert. You've seen his other films, some of them. Mm-hmm. Is this unique in his filmography? No. Or is it similar to other things that he may have done?
No, it's really similar. I mean, his movies are all kind of... I mean, the biggest takeaway from his movies, Ian, it's actually interesting you mentioned this, is he's really great with faces. He's also really great with exploring the tension between people in cities and people in small towns. Cars are a thing in his other films. I was going to say that, like, I think there are movies like this. I think his other movies are like this. I think that the whole idea of, like, cars and travel and long drives, like, you can look at a lot of them Wenders films. You can, like, I see Antonioni in these movies. Like, I mean, I get it. I think it's a more unique movie than, like, a submarine film. But I do think that, like, there are films in the history of art cinema that this film hews very closely to. I mean, and that's one of the valuable things about film criticism, is that film critics take that information and they distill it. I mean, Paul Schrader wrote the book Transcendental Film, which I think is the name of the book, and he kind of took all these slow cinema filmmakers and kind of created a way to analyze this stuff. And I think that that's one of the values of film criticism, is that it takes the information and puts it into a form that we can all understand, which is useful.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like Anatolia before, and I haven't even heard of a movie like that that combines an ambiguous crime story that combines two states of being: the nighttime dreamlike state, and the daytime, the chopping up a body as part of work kind of thing. But that's just my take on it. I mean, there's no wrong answer. Yeah, I mean, if you want to, as a film critic, I think I would have a hard time with this movie.
I don't exactly know what that means. I mean, a lot of film critics, love this movie. Right.
But how would you? It's so unique. Have you seen any movie like this before?
Not told specifically the way that Ceylan tells the story, but I have
part
seen
of the movie. I think that's the key part of the movie.
No, I mean, but I'm saying, like, in terms of, I'm struggling because I've been up since 4:00.
Yeah, no problem.
But I have seen movies that involve, of course, if you want to talk about murder mysteries or long drives or men bonding over, in kind of these weird crisis situations, hangout movies. I mean, we can talk about hangout movies because it is sort of a subgenre, right?
Yeah.
This movie is speaking the same language as a lot of other cinema. It just it's sort of like Tarantino has done, is combining that into his own, putting his own stamp, his own, little bit of sprinkling of a special ingredient into a soup that's comes from a long tradition of soups.
But the last 40 minutes, it's weird in combination with the first 2/3 of the movie. That makes it weird. Kind of like I thought, Uncle Bunmi who can recall his past lives. There's
Uncle
really
Bunmi,
no other movie
right,
like that.
And that's the thing is I would say Uncle Bunmi who can recall his past lives is a more unique film than Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. Partially, I can say that because I've seen other movies that have addressed the themes in Anatolia better, I think, and in a more complete and satisfying way, even in ways that, you know, leave room for ambiguity more effectively. Whereas I wasn't thinking during Bunmi, wow, I've seen this before and this isn't really working for me. It is its own, you know, fully realized vision, really well thought out. And again, Ceylan may have been working through a lot of stuff and had a very clear idea of it. It's just that for me as an audience member and yes, as a critic watching it, I'm like, this could have been a little tighter. This could have been, you know, I don't know why this was included. What does this mean? This other stuff is so much stronger. Just go in that direction. And yeah, that's me over his fictitious shoulder 9 years after he's released the film. But, you know, as an audience member, you know, and that's just me. You're also an audience member. Liam, you're an audience member. You guys have experienced this movie way more than I have. I just have questions, and that's fine. I think that's where we can leave it because it's an hour 15 minutes in, guys.
I also like David Lynch's Dune, so I like movies as they are.
I have not seen David Lynch's Dune. I intend to fix that. I intend to fix that before the remake comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. I should.
So Ian, you saw a slow cinema movie that wasn't completely satisfactory.
Right, and you know, it doesn't. I'm not saying it's bad or I didn't like it.
Right.
I didn't love it on some levels. I'm just think this is the first one that I can recall where I'm like, I'm not completely on board.
Yeah.
Which, you know, for having done like 7 or however many of these episodes, that's a pretty damn good track record.
It's a good ratio. Yeah.
So,
awesome.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I said cool.
Any final words, Liam, on the movie that we haven't talked about?
No. Good though, I like it. But yeah, so it's an interesting movie to think about. I'll say that.
Yeah. When you bury a body, remember where you did it.
Yes.
The big takeaway from the movie.
That's the lesson.
So wait, here's a question. Does Dune, and I haven't seen it, but does Dune count as slow cinema? I
wouldn't think so. I mean, it's a sci-fi movie, but the way he made it, it's slow. I mean, you know, it's like a dream state type storytelling. Watch it. Watch one of the early, like the 1984 version. Because I enjoyed it thoroughly. I don't know why people are angry about it. A lot of people don't like it.
Here's what I'm thinking. The three of us, you know, one has seen it, the other two have not. We should get back together and talk Dune at some point.
Sure.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Cool. Maybe after the new Dune comes out, we can compare the two.
Or before. You know,
before. Yeah.
Because at this point, who knows when that new Dune is coming out?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well,
thanks for joining us, Liam.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hopefully, we added something positive to your week.
Absolutely. It was good to talk to you.
Awesome.
All right, man. Take care, guys. Have a great night.